Jessica, I'm so happy that you asked me to do this.
I'm so happy that you agreed to do this.
Because I've got some questions for you that I've been really anxious to ask. First of all, how did you were making, as I understand it, you were making a film, and that's how you met Gladys. Can you tell us about that? Can we just get right to the beginning?
Sure. So I was working on a film about population issues, and I wanted to look at the reality of life for children born into families without the means to care for them. And so in Uganda, there are thousands of kids who end up stranded through a variety of reasons, poverty, illness, misfortune, neglect. And along the way, I encountered this newspaper column called Lost and Abandoned, and it was written by this woman, Gladys Kalabala. And it occurred to me that she could be an intersection between lost kids, police, the public, their families. It just seemed like she was somebody who was kind of at the nexus of this issue. So that's kind of how I started getting into her world.
Okay, so you were making this film in Uganda with Gladys and other people.
Yes.
Okay, so you're a filmmaker and you make films all the time, but you don't write books all the time.
Yeah.
So this was a very big change, it seems like. So when you met Gladys and she's writing this article and you put her in the film? She's
right.
in the film?
So Gladys was one story in this film, and I neglected to say her column profiles some of these kids who are stranded in one way or another, and the intention is to reunite them with family. That's the ultimate goal. And so it's a very simple concept, but I thought, well, I'll talk to this woman and see what insights she can give us into this issue. And within moments of meeting her, I realized that she was the story. I mean, this woman, she's an ordinary person in sort of the most basic sense. She doesn't have money. She doesn't have transportation. She doesn't have the backing of an NGO, but she was taking on the children of strangers, literally hundreds of them over the years, trying to help them connect with family, get shelter, schooling, medical attention, whatever was the most pressing need. But what really amazed me was that she was cheerful about it. Like there was sort of a buoyancy that she had. I mean, the first day we were filming with her, I watched as she was interviewing these kids who were just a variety of just terrible stories of neglect. And I just wanted to go back to my room and curl up in the fetal position around a bottle of vodka, But with Gladys, you end up, you go on to the next case and the next case, and by the end of the day, we're chatting in the car and we're laughing, and it wasn't that she was dismissive of any of the heartbreak that she had encountered. It was just she had this buoyancy to keep going. And I realized after a few days of filming with her, I didn't want to move on. I was just so attracted to this this mystery of character. How was her resilience forged under the same pressure that had crushed so many others? So that was the thing where I was like, I need to find out what makes this woman tick. So that's how I was like, okay, how do I do this? And I thought maybe I could write about her.
So it's interesting to me that you were completely compelled by her, which means that in some ways it means to me it's bringing up questions in yourself.
Yeah.
Like, what are the questions in yourself that are getting answered or getting asked by engaging with Gladys? And also, if you could talk about that a little bit, and also why, being who you are and with your experience, having this incredibly compelling character, why not make a movie about Gladys?
Right. Well, I feel like maybe we can return to that first question a little bit later.
Right.
But in terms of filming, again, because we had already filmed with her a little bit, I just felt like I wanted to get deeper. And like when you're making a documentary, there's always this ideal that you're going to be unobtrusive. You're going to be fly on the wall, and you've got your crew, you've got equipment. You're like, oh, we got to take a lunch break, and that light's
Right.
all. So you never are able to achieve that, especially when you're somewhere you're in a place where you attract even more attention.
Mm-hmm.
So I was really excited by the idea of being able to just follow her without all of those obstacles.
I
And
see.
so, and I thought too that, after editing the film, when you edit, you have all these like sound bites in your head, you have the person's voice in your head. And after I finished editing, her voice was still in my head. I mean, I could remember just about everything she said, and I just thought, I feel like I have access to that. And also, the other thing that was really appealing about Gladys as a subject is that she is someone who is always herself. You know how rare that is if you're trying to make a film about someone or write a book about someone or draw a picture of someone, to have a subject who allows herself to be seen. So she just, in any situation, I might get a lot of stares in the beginning, but then she sort of takes over and everyone just follows in her wake, and I'm just the silent Asian lady in the corner who's all of a sudden a lot less interesting. So I realized that because she was just throwing the door to her life open so freely and just, as unaffected as you can be with someone following you, I thought I had a chance to capture that intimacy that you need to be able to write a book. So, and again, I'm just thinking, sure, why not? I'll try this. But that's kind of how it started.
The other thing that I'm curious about, I really want to know these things. How'd you do it? I mean, did you just ride with her in the car? Because the book is written as if you're not there. The book is written, as if you're with her when she's going to sleep at midnight, and she's up in the morning, and she's in all these places. It's an incredibly beautifully written book, and you feel very intimate. You feel like you were right there in the car with the driver and her friend Esther, and the three of you. Yeah. The three of them are there. And then every once in a while, I'd say, "Wait a minute, it's the four of them who are probably there." So is that how it happened?
Yeah. So. What would happen is, and again, this was also a very liberating thing, difference from working on a film where you really have to schedule your day. You have to know what you're going to get. With Gladys, so, she would go and she would find a child that she had put in her column and no one's responded. And then that would just bother her. She'd think, I bet I can find out where this kid's village is. I bet I can find out someone who knows this kid. And then she would just say, okay, we have transportation today. Great. We're going to drive up to this place. I don't really know the name of the village, but she says it's by this place, and so we'll go there, and then we'll ask directions, and we'll find somebody. And so we would just go. So I would just be in the car. Half the time I didn't really know what we're doing, so I would try to listen as much as possible, and then we would go, and then I would also listen while we were there. There's a lot of different languages.
English?
A lot of different languages, because English is one of the official languages in Uganda, but in a lot of these villages we went to, there would be another language. Sometimes Gladys would not know the language. Mike, who's a character in the book, and he's our driver on most days, he speaks about 14 different languages. So he would translate for me in real time, and then he would also translate for Gladys sometimes. And then in the car, on the way back, in the dark, I would listen to them sort of unpack the events of the day, and that's when I could ask questions. But a lot of times it was that kind of, they would also want to share impressions of, did you see when that father came in? Do you think he really cares about this child? So there was a lot of really helpful discussion that came from that.
Fantastic. So why don't we do a little bit of reading so that we can give people the idea. You want to do that first bit of reading. Can you explain to them before you do that what a boda boda is?
Yeah, boda boda is a little motorcycle taxi, not the world's safest form of transportation, but in Uganda, where traffic is really difficult, it's one of the fastest. So this little section I was going to read here is about the genesis of Gladys's column. So Gladys is someone who came into journalism late in life, and she got a reputation for being able to write human interest stories, to go wander into a place and chat with somebody and get their life story. So her editor at the paper is a man named Dr. Wendo. One day in 2007, Dr. Wendo called Gladys over to his desk to discuss an assignment. His brother-in-law was a policeman at Wandageya, where lost children frequently showed up. Wandageya was the closest police station to the New Vision offices. Gladys had covered similar stories of neglected and abandoned children. What if she were to go to Wandageya to write about all such cases they had this week? Gladys needed no coaxing. She waved down a boda boda and went to the station, where she interviewed the children and gathered information from the officers. The resulting piece in Saturday Vision, that's the newspaper, included a half-dozen profiles. Next to the children's photos, Gladys summarized the circumstances of their plight, the locations where they had been found, names of known relatives, home villages, and schools, followed by the phone number of the police station. The next week, Gladys checked back with the police to see whether the article had had any impact. Sure enough, 3 people had come to the station to pick up their children. "Oh," Dr. Wendo exclaimed, "that's great, Gladys." He sent her back to Wandageya. Again more children, again more reunions. Gladys quickly made the assignment her own. The only assistance she required was transport money and the loan of a company camera. She easily got in the good books of the police, and between the officers and the children, she gleaned every bit of relevant information. Dr. Wendo was delighted. Again, he called Gladys to his desk. "I feel we can create something with this, weekly." Gladys's heart beat faster. "A weekly column? Yes, it is a good idea. But will you be able to get the stories every week?" he asked. "I don't want to be disappointed one time when I have the space for you and you can't fill it." "Trust me, it can't fail." This was less a boast about her reporting skills than a comment on the state of the world. In Uganda, millions of children were growing up without parents. The mass abduction of children by Joseph Kony for his fanatical Lord's Resistance Army in the 1990s and early 2000s had drawn much media attention, but there were other, less sensational reasons for the neglected generation. Extreme poverty, the loss of family members to AIDS, the lack of education, and most of all, lack of access to family planning. In 2013, the average Ugandan woman gave birth to 6 children. Gladys had seen many children having children, girls who had never been taught about sex. Every day, hundreds of these children and children of children washed up on the shores of urban centers like Kampala. How many of them could Gladys feature in her column? Lack of material would never be her problem, only lack of space. So, yeah.
So that was her beginning, and she was not trained as a journalist, not trained as a social worker, but her personality comes through so incredibly in this book. Her strength of character, she puts people at ease in a way that is just admirable. How do you think she came about that character? Can you talk about her early life and up until this point, who Gladys was and how she was formed?
Sure. Yeah, I think it's a really important question. And it's interesting because Gladys was not someone who really wanted to explain herself very much. But she was the oldest in a family of 8 children. And there's a lot of strife in the home. Her parents argued a lot. And she was sent with one of her brothers to go and live with her grandparents. Her grandparents' home was quite idyllic, and it was a place where she was the only girl around, but she was treated equal to the boys. You know, she was given, special chores, and so it was a time where there was just a beautiful kind of order and a feeling of. You knew where you fit in. You knew what behavior was expected. There was a lot of respect, and there was this idea. Her grandfather was a reverend, that there was always room at the table for someone in need. So I think that's really something that she took with her. But then when her grandfather died, and she was sent back to her parents, her father abandoned the family, and Gladys was forced to stop her schooling when she was about 17 to take care of her siblings. So I think from that point on, she really had to put into play all the principles that she had taken from living with her grandparents. So that's the logical explanation, but if you talk to Gladys, I think she would just say, this is how I was made. If I see someone who's, needs something and I think I can help, I just do it. So the truth is probably somewhere in between.
Yeah, because she says that kind of thing throughout the book, like, this is just what anybody would do. Or, if there's a need and so I meet it. But she's an extraordinary person. I think you're right to have written a book about her. And I mean, you do return over and over to the grandfather, to the grandparents, as a former of character as well.
But you know what I think was so satisfying to find out through working on the book and following her around. I followed her around for off and on over a period of 3 years, is to discover that one reason why she does this is not that she's a martyr or somehow, she's saintly. God, she hates it when anyone describes her as a saint. She's like, am I not human? But she is a seeker of joy. And it's exciting. Oh my God, every story, every single case, every single story of a kid, there's some twist, there's something that comes up, there's some aha moment. It's not always a joyous aha, but there's some satisfaction in finding what actually is going on and what this kid needs or what's the way forward. So, when she solves something, or I was really privileged to be witness to a couple of these reunions where a child is connected again to family or to somebody in the family, and where everyone thought that this connection was lost, and it is just the most pure joy. And again, it's not like everything is happily ever after, but there is something essential in our human need to have a place where you feel like you belong, somebody who cares about you, some connection, and seeing that rekindled is just, I understand it. I understand her pursuit of that.
Yeah. So I want to talk about some of the kids. Let's talk about Ezra. So the book is organized. You really get to know Gladys and the driver, Mike, who's phenomenal, film guy, so he knows everybody, and Esther. I love her friend Esther, too, who's always sort of smoking in rye.
Yes.
So we like Esther. But the book is organized mostly as case studies, as the stories of these different kids. It doesn't feel like case studies, but it's the stories of the different kids. And one of them starts early in the book and then picks up late, and it's a particularly moving story about a kid named Ezra. I know you want to read a little bit about it, but do you want to set the stage a little bit first?
Sure. So Ezra was a kid who, when he was about 3 years old, he started to have this growth on his face that at first was something that was just puzzling to the rest of his family, and then he became ostracized. No one wanted to sit next to him in school. He stopped going to school. His family was very poor. His mother abandoned him actually when his swelling started, and then his father died, and he was left at the care of a stepmother. And I think in a place like Uganda, especially in some of the poorer communities, there's no resources for someone with disabilities. So he was, a lot of times you find people get sort of just shut in, or they might be abandoned. In his case, he became like the servant of the family. And then when his face just kept on growing, he realized, he had constant headaches, he was losing his sight, and he thought, if I don't do something, I think I'm going to die. So he scrimped and saved and got money, and his idea was, I'm going to go to the big city. I'm going to go to Kampala, and he lives, way out in the boonies, and I'm going to see if I can work there and save up money for my surgery. So he ended up, trying to get to the city. It was just, such a journey for a 16-year-old kid who's never really been anywhere. And then he goes to the New Vision offices. There's also a TV station there. And he thought, if I can tell my story, maybe I can get some help. And that's where Gladys meets him. And she doesn't know what to do for him because he doesn't have a cell phone. He does have a family, sort of, but she just says, look, take my number, and if you get into trouble, go to a police station, and they will let you call me. So.
And one of the most touching things in the book for me was when she first met him. He's sitting there with this swollen face that is deformed, and he's been mocked all his walk, all the way walking for miles and miles. People are shunning him, giving space, all of that. And Gladys goes right up to him and touches his face. And says, what is this? Or tell me everything. And touch it. It's the fact that it was that human touch that everyone else was so afraid of him and kept their distance and mocked him. And she, in a way, empathized with him, put herself in that position. What if I had that? What would that feel like? And
Yeah.
there's that human connection that she makes over and over.
And, Ezra had told me, and it's in the book, he said, that was the first time anyone had touched my face in over 10 years. And, you just
That
think,
was the moment.
yeah, yeah. So their fates become entwined through the book, and there's a lot of drama and a lot of loveliness. But
You want to read the section about Ezra?
yeah,
Start there.
so this is a short passage here. Oh, okay. So this is after Gladys first meets Ezra and then tells him, if you get in trouble, call me. 2 days later, Gladys got a call from Central Police Station. When the boy's visit to the TV station had failed to yield any funds, he sought help in finding the nearest police, just as Gladys had advised. Upon seeing his condition, though, the CPS officers wanted to return him to Chibuku. That's his home village. Ezra refused. He would not go back home. He had come to Kampala to work, and he intended to work so that he could get care for his face. He was 16, old enough to know there was no future in turning back. Gladys had assisted all kinds of children, but she reserved a special place in her heart for those who were truly bold. Not the reckless ones who disregarded consequences, or the brash ones who were confident and outspoken, but the vulnerable ones who knew what they were risking when they planted their feet and refused to move. There was a difference between fearless and brave. Ezra was young, ill, alone, and penniless. But here he was, telling these police that they could not make him go home. How could she not help such a one? "Gladys," an officer exclaimed, "do you know this one?" "Yes," she said, "I know him." Ezra watched in awe as Gladys pushed and cajoled and reasoned and admonished the police to let him take refuge at the station. He had never had someone fight for him before. At last, the officer in charge relented. The boy could remain at the station, but only for a little while. "I will find a solution," Gladys said reassuringly. "Just give me some few days." With the boy off the streets, she set to work, making phone calls to Uganda Cancer Institute and writing an article about Ezra's predicament and the necessity for a CT scan. If it was cancer, Gladys knew it must be quickly diagnosed. Among the many pictures she had taken of the boy, she chose a close-up portrait to submit with the piece. To Gladys's dismay, the photo was rejected by the editors. The image was too upsetting, she was told. Readers might complain. No one wanted to sit down with the paper on Saturday morning and spit up their tea. Gladys was angry, but she was also hurt. The anger was because the decision rendered the article useless. How could they expect anyone to step forward to help a boy whose deformity no one could see? The hurt was for the boy. She had moved through town with him. She had seen the world through his eyes, how people gaped and pointed, how taxi passengers recoiled and changed seats. It made you feel small, like you were not as good as other people, like you were too ugly to have your picture in the paper. So at that point, Gladys is in.
She's his mother now at this
Yeah,
point.
yeah.
Right.
She steps
Right.
in. Yeah.
So can you tell me a little bit about how Gladys lived? So she had her own children, and she had a roommate, and the driving, and just what her life was like as a human being, aside from doing this work that she's doing.
Yeah, so Gladys, she lives in a tiny one-room, she still lives in this tiny one-room place in Entebbe, and she has a roommate. I mean, it's a really tiny place. I mean, it's bigger than this rug, but probably not by much. And from there, she commutes to Kampala. And there are days, I mean, it's not uncommon that she'll spend almost 3 hours getting there and almost 3 hours back. It's an enormous commitment. And her salary is very, very tiny, but she's just the most resourceful person. Somehow she just finds a way. She'll come up with little ideas, and then also through the paper, through her column, she'll say, if you want to help this child, that people can send money, and she might. One of the big things is, like, if she knows where a kid lives, just the bus fare to try to get the kid home. So that's kind of how she manages in terms of the kids. But it is always, she's got so many kids now who call her mom. And
but she has her own children.
And she has her own children. They're grown, her two kids. And they're supportive of her work, but they're also separate. They're doing their own thing. But I think, the story of Ezra really illustrates, though, how Gladys doesn't go in there thinking, I'm going to adopt a 16-year-old today. She goes in thinking, oh, maybe I can help this one get some food, or this one doesn't have shoes. I mean, it can be a simple thing, and then, fast forward 6 years, and she's, well, you'll see in the book, yeah.
Yeah, and then talk about how she helps these kids get education. So she's got, in the book you cover so many wonderful stories. Douglas and Deborah, Trevor is a kid who loves to kick the ball. He's like a troublemaking kid. They don't understand it for years and years. And finally, later, he's diagnosed with autism.
Yeah.
But they've been dealing with him, and Gladys has been loving him and encompassing him for years. And so she's just got this tribe of children. But can you talk about a little bit, sort of the moving toward the birthday party?
Yeah.
So how the school and how she manages. Because she pays
Sure.
for some of
Yeah,
them.
yeah.
I really don't understand how she manages.
I don't understand either, seriously. So it's not like she takes in all these kids on her own. I mean, she has no place to put the kids, but she does have a network of friends. There's a lot of police officers, but mainly women, who try to help out. Like the police officers who will say, okay, the kid can sleep under the desk for a couple days. We'll allow that. And then there's some friends who run children's homes, but again, a lot of the places, they're just at capacity. So she does have one friend who runs a school in Entebbe, and this woman and Gladys, they together, I think they form this their personalities together means that no child can be turned away. So it's a for-profit school, and there's at least 10 kids there that are Gladys's kids. So they kind of split the burden of tuition that doesn't actually necessarily get covered. But a lot of the schools there, the kids actually live there until there's these like 2 month breaks, and that's where Gladys really scrambles. Where do you put these kids for 2 months? They don't have a home to go to necessarily.
Right. Yeah. And I wanted to refer back to for a minute to what you were saying before about Gladys is a seeker of joy, and that she is always going for reuniting these kids with their family. One of the things that surprised me in the book is that she'll find a family, she'll bring the kid back to it. There's a moment of uniting and saying, yes, that's my mother. Oh, I thought you were lost. I thought you were dead. Here we are. And then Gladys takes the kid and brings him back to school.
Yep.
It's not like she leaves the kid.
That's right. Yeah.
So can you just?
I think a lot of times, in some cases, the family, there was, I don't want to say like they dumped the kid, but it's really hard to accommodate all the children in a community sometimes. And so sometimes, a kid will run away because of that. Sometimes the
abuse,
situation, there's abuse as well. So she feels like the bond is important, but if she has a better situation for the child, and she doesn't do it without permission, she'll say, are you all right with this child staying in school? And the family is usually very grateful that is something that is available.
In each one of the stories, it's like Gladys is a detective,
yeah.
right? So she's trying to find the family, and that's the first part of it. But every time she goes into these villages, into the homes and stuff, she's questioning everybody to see who's telling the truth, who's lying, who is the abuser, who's really sad and happy to see the kid, and all of that stuff. And so she's sussing everything out in a way that makes the story very interesting to listen to.
And she's a very big personality, and so sometimes she is that person who can just go up and say, are you drunk? Like she can sort of get away with that kind of bluntness, and she can sort of laugh it off. And she's quick to anger, but it dissipates very quickly. Mm-hmm. Like she really, I think she holds, she doesn't take the moral high ground in a lot of cases, because she knows that this child still is going to have a bond with this parent or this relative who's not perfect.
Yes.
And so that needs to be preserved in some way, whatever is useful for the child. So it's always what is going to be part of the child's life, what's the reality, and what is the child going to need from this.
Yeah. And do you think that goes back to her own life? Of her, the difficulty with her own parents and her own?
I think so. And also sometimes she would just flat out say to me, Jessica, this is the African way. I mean, this is, you know, and I don't know, her impression too of like families in the US sometimes would be like, oh, you know, when your relatives get old, you just leave them, you know, like, so I think it's not just Gladys in terms of the importance of keeping those family ties as sometimes flawed as they can be.
Right.
You know.
So you want to talk about the birthday party a little bit?
Sure.
And some of the different kids, maybe you want to
Sure.
describe them?
So there's that school in Entebbe where about 10 of Gladys's kids are staying, and so you know these kids, they've had such each one of them has had a lot of drama. There's you know, a kid who ran away from home. He says, you know, there was a lot of abuse in the home, and he walked, you know, like 60 miles to get to Kampala. There's a girl who has a curved spine who was ostracized by her mother. There's a lot of, I don't know, there's so many, it's a lot of heartbreak to string out in one list, but in this place, for a lot of the kids, it's a more stability than they've had. And then there's a community that's sort of grown out of that. So at one point, Gladys was visiting the school, and the kids, they just, once they see her coming, and Gladys, you know, a lot of times she has no money, she's got nothing, but they will come and they'll like put their hands in her pockets and just see if she has anything there. So sometimes she's trying to hide, but there's like an open courtyard, and she's not a person who hides easily, and she will just try to sneak in, and you know, the kids, it's almost like they have a sixth sense and they all come running out. So one time she makes the mistake of asking a child when her birthday is, and the child said, oh, you know, my birthday is in 2 weeks. And so Gladys realizes, I have to do something now that I know when it is. And then the other kids are like, my birthday is when? And then a lot of kids don't know their birthdays. So she decides she has to hold one birthday and like get one cake for all the kids. And of course, as soon as she says it, she's thinking, God, how am I going to do this? But it's one of the sweetest little moments, I think, in the book.
Yeah,
you know,
because the kids all look forward to it. Some of them don't know when their birthdays are. Some of them are lying. My birthday is like this week and next week and next week.
That's right.
They're like, what am I getting for my birthday?
Yeah.
You know, it's just the spirit of the
Yeah.
kids. You know, you describe the disabilities and the difficulties and the abuse that they've experienced, but the spirit of these kids is incredible. It matches Gladys's in a lot of ways.
Yeah, the resilience, particularly of a child like Deborah. You know, a lot of the kids, they long for reunions, knowing that it's not going to be a storybook ending. I think the kids sense that, but they don't. That doesn't make them want it less.
That's right.
And I think, you know, with Gladys, there's this idea of whether it's the reunion with a family member that might not go perfectly, or if it's the, you know, little shared wonky birthday party. I think Gladys is able to sort of see all these events from a child's perspective. I mean, these kind of connections, these little moments she knows can feed a child for a long time. I mean, I have been with her literally when we have driven 6 hours out into the middle of nowhere, you know, and Mike is like, the car's gonna break down, I'm not staying over here, you know, here overnight. And got out of the car, she spent about, I'm not kidding, like 6 minutes with these kids. We got back in the car, drove 6 hours back. But for her, it's like she wants to see the kids with her own eyes, see what's going on, and she wants them to see her. And they know that what a big deal it is for someone to make that effort. And so there's nothing really to substitute for that face-to-face contact. So a lot of times she doesn't have any resources, she doesn't have anything to give. That can be something that really nourishes.
She gives them her attention.
Attention, yeah, that's right. You know, I see you, you see me, and that is not nothing.
That's not nothing. No,
Yeah.
certainly. So all the kids are now. Her caseload is growing. She's got hundreds of kids, and every week she's writing this column and getting more kids, and she's a sort of a woman alone addressing this major national problem in Uganda. And on one of these trips, she's driving the 6 hours into the bush and into where the car can't go, and she starts to see farms and gardens and a sign that says Perseverance Farms. And she thinks, Perseverance Farms, that's what we need. we need something like that. So what does she do then, and how does that, because that's the title of the book, right? Garden of the Lost and Abandoned.
Right,
So.
right. She ends up naming her garden Perseverance Gardens.
Oh, she
Yeah,
does.
she
Oh,
does.
right.
Yeah, yeah. But that's,
I
yeah,
thought
the
it was
idea.
Hope for the Helpless. Oh, it started off that as Hope for the Helpless.
Hope for the helpless is the
Is
motto.
the tagline.
That's the tagline, right? You
Okay.
gotta have that.
So what
yeah.
happened? How did that come about? Can you tell a little bit? I know it's a spine through the whole book about the garden,
Yeah,
really.
yeah.
But if you could just give us a little bit of the highlights.
Sure. So, as I was describing before, it's a very enervating thing to have to scramble for resources for every new kid, and also all the other kids. There's kids who she's constantly. Every child, in the schools, even if they're staying at the school, they don't have money for books, they don't have money for food, they don't have money for clothing. So you multiply by that by however many kids she's now taking care of. It's really, really daunting. So she decides, I need to start something to help my work be sustaining in some way. And so she ends up taking out a loan on a small parcel of land. And so when I started, I'd already talked to her about writing the book, and it was very funny. Just a little segue. She was, when I told her, I said, Gladys, I got this together. I'm gonna be able to write a book about you. And I thought, oh, is she gonna be wary? Is she gonna be flustered? And to be honest, she wasn't even that excited. She was just like, she said,
Sure.
Who really wants to know about this woman from Africa? And the next thing she was like, okay, when are you coming? Very, so then she just happened to casually mention, oh yeah, I took out a loan on my future earnings, which are very, very small, to invest in this land, and I'm going to start, growing things, and it's going to be great, and that's how I'm going to support my work.
Well, she was going to grow vegetables and sell them,
Yeah.
right? And that was going to be a money-making venture.
But, of course, she's pretty much, when she was a little kid, she had to dig in the garden a bit, but she's a city woman, and she knows nothing about farming. And so I'm just thinking, this sounds good, but I don't know. And it turns into such a drama throughout the book. I didn't anticipate that, and I think part of it, and this is sort of just fascinating in terms of looking at Gladys and what drives her. I think for a lot of people who are used to where they have an instinct to help others and they can speak up for other people, more vulnerable people, a lot of times it's much harder for them to fight for themselves. And I think that's what happened to her in a lot of ways, that her trusting nature sort of turns over and becomes a bit of an obstacle. She has to rely on adults who don't necessarily have her interests at heart. So there's a lot of encounters with con men and people, these revelations of character that were startling to all of us, and just watching her try to navigate that was
And so
was
did
painful.
you go through that process with her,
Oh,
where you
absolutely.
met Zam and the baby, and you thought, oh, Zam is going to be the one that saves the garden and does everything, and then you were there for the...
All of it, yeah, all of that. And so we would be in contact in between visits. We would Skype, and I don't know, there's a funny thing too. Whenever we Skype, and we're not doing video Skype because it just doesn't work, but every time I'm like, Gladys, and then every time she hears my voice, she just laughs, and then I laugh, and we just laugh for 30 seconds, and then we get into conversation. I don't know, it's funny every single time. But so yes, sort of seeing from week to week the impression of are things going to work, are they not going to work, and there was just a lot that happened. Just a small example, she wasn't able to live on the land because she still has her job and her commute, and so somebody was supposed to put in the foundation with good cement, and she had raised the money, and there was a lot of capital in that, and the person who did it filled it up with dead tree trunks and then just put a layer of cement on top. It's that kind of thing where...
So it starts sinking pretty quickly.
So, that kind of stuff would happen all the time, and I think there was just a moment of her just shaking her belief in the world. Not that she's a big believer in karma necessarily, or that, people are fundamentally good, but I just think she's so used to persevering, just the idea that if you, sort of keep your eyes on the ultimate goal and you keep working towards it, it'll work out. And I think that really got shaken in that.
Yeah, it was so interesting because she's so careful when she's detecting whether or not a family is going to be good for the kid, and she's sussing out
Yeah.
who's the good guy, who's the bad guy in this situation, and all of that. And the drama of the garden is just incredible. I think you're going to enjoy it when you read the book because it just goes on. It seems to go on for several years,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
That different people are going to be caretakers, different people are going to grow things for her, all of these bits, and then she keeps getting let down
Yeah.
and betrayed, and somehow she never gives up. It's phenomenal, and it ultimately works out.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
Which is something that maybe there's a lesson for us. I don't know.
Yeah. I do think, there is a moment where she wonders, is there something wrong with me?
Yes,
and
you
her
wrote
brothers
that.
her brothers are saying, you're not Ugandan enough, like you've got to be more tough, but she always thinks of herself. She's certainly a strong person. But anyway, it's one of those things, you start working on something and always the surprises are the things that are the most interesting and the richest. And that whole storyline I didn't anticipate I didn't know it was going to happen. And I think it absolutely informs this fuller portrait of who she is. Yeah.
Yes. It makes her human, like she was saying. I'm not a saint, I'm human.
Yeah.
I would love for you to tell the story of Rose, which is one of the most touching stories and one of the brightest little spirits in the book.
So Rose is this tiny girl. I mean, if you saw her, I thought she was probably about 6, but they say she's probably about 10. She's a girl who, when you meet her in the story, all we know is that she really wants to see her father. And as Gladys has access to transportation, she's kind of got a list in her mind of kids who need to go somewhere. And so there were several kids who got to go and see their families, and Rose has been waiting and waiting. And so Gladys finally says, okay, it's your turn. We'll take you to go see your father. And then what we find out is her father is in prison. He's in prison for having raped her when she was even smaller than she is. And so that journey, it's one of those, it's such a poignant story because there's anticipation from little Rose. And she's kind of a whimsical thinker. She's not, I think maybe because of the trauma, she's, her way of thinking is very sort of dreamy, a little bit malleable. And then we go through the prison, which is a pretty scary, difficult place to get to where you need to go. And when her father comes out, she's so excited, and the moment she sees him, she just crumples. I mean, her body starts shaking, and it's almost like this dream she gets woken up from. So Gladys was taking her, knowing that this is probably not, I don't think she really wanted to take her, but what she wanted to find out from the father is there any other relatives, or someone else in the family that Rose can have a connection to? And so she manages to get one name from him, and that's a bit of a triumph. But when we left the prison, Rose was saying that, like all the other kids, when they would go and they would reconnect with a family member, and they come back, and all the other kids would gather around and want to know what happened. And she said, I don't want you to tell the other kids that I saw my father. And so Gladys says, okay, what do you want us to tell them? And she says, I want you to tell them that we went to the beach and I had a great time. And that's the end of that story.
Yeah, but this little kid's spirit was amazing, and I think that it was telling too that Gladys understood, even if the father was a bad guy, which he was, but the desire for the connection, that there was something important about allowing Rose to go through that process.
I think with Rose, there is something there too, where I think she has an understanding of what her dad did, and so being able to process that is something that's
and not just
that's
stay
important.
like a little 6-year-old.
Right. But the moment she had that reaction, it was like, okay, let's go. And then Gladys just stayed and grilled this guy till he gave up a name. But it was it was a more there's all different kinds of stories in the book, but that one was just this little moment that really stayed with me.
And then there's the boy with 7 names.
Yeah.
So what
Yeah.
about that boy?
Yeah.
And Gladys just kept detecting.
Yes. So yeah, there are those cases where it really is like detective work, and so this boy shows up. His story was that. Again, there's very little resources and facilities at the police stations. So a lot of times, kids will, like street kids, will just kind of hang around the police station because it feels like a safer place. Well, this kid, he was told by one of the policemen there, he and 2 other boys, hey, go and burn some of this trash for us. We'll give you a little something to eat or a few coins. So these boys were throwing stuff in this trash fire, and there were some cans of chemicals, and the boys got burned. So that's when Gladys got involved in this case. And so she's trying to find out about this kid, and so he says his name is Junior Mugarwa. So as the story goes along, every chapter he gets another name because they find out, oh, wait a minute, he's really from here, and oh, his parents showed up, and so the portrait of this life, and you find out why it is that kids feel the need to lie. Sometimes they don't know there's a hole in their story, and they just try to fill it, and but it's quite an odyssey to figure out who this kid really is, and his name tells the story of his life, which I thought was really interesting. And at the end, he kind of gets to choose his name, which is also
all this string of names.
Yeah.
Right. So the next thing we have here is maybe to read a little bit about the garden. Do you want to do that with Ezra?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay.
So this is the last little section
Yeah.
here. Okay. So the garden, which was such a saga.
Oh, you might want to say about the 3 con men from Ezra's village. Is that in this section?
Yeah, they have names in this little excerpt, so I might just say the
Okay.
con men, so
Okay.
you'll know. And it's con men in a long series. Okay, so what happens is that after this series of con men, and Gladys just feeling like I wanted to do this to build some foundation for the kids, and I don't know if I can do it. The only person that she can trust is Ezra, and he is the one. She doesn't ask him. He steps up and he says, "I can help. I can do this. I know how to do this." And she at first doesn't really take him seriously. She still thinks of him as a kid, and so what we see is her sort of realizing that one of her kids has grown into a man.
And he's had his surgery by now.
And he's had a surgery. Yes. Yeah. Okay. On one of her visits to the garden, Ezra invited Gladys to sit down on the veranda. He served her tea and roasted some maize. Then he announced that he wanted to build a structure for raising pigs. Pointing to an area he cleared, he described the layout and showed her a drawing of the pig structure he imagined. Gladys was astonished. First, Ezra had been raised a Muslim. When he started working at the gardens, she had bid farewell to her dream of a bustling piggery. Second, how did he know how to do such a thing? Smiling shyly, Ezra produced a book in which he had studied the plans for a successful pig farm. Ah, okay, we will be thinking of this, she said, marveling over his neat drawing. At the moment, they had no money for piglets or materials to build a sty, but what a plan. Grand schemes aside, Ezra knew that the gardens needed hands to pull the weeds and sweep the grounds. He was still angry about all the damage that the place had suffered. Now that I'm here, he vowed, nothing else bad will happen to this place. I will restore this place to its feet. And so Ezra began to take care of the gardens. As he attended class during the day and studied over the weekend, it was a struggle. He would run back from school to be able to dig a little bit before the sun went down. The gardens lacked the daily labor they needed to thrive and to keep the daytime thieves at bay, but at least the house did not suffer for their nighttime break-ins. Out of the last batch of trees Gladys had purchased back when Zam, one of the con people, was still around, only about a dozen out of the 45 trees were still alive. A loss of over 30 trees was nothing to be proud of, but the survivors were doing nicely under Ezra's care. He attended to the sickly ones and kept their trunks clear of weeds. Even though he was the compound's lone occupant, Ezra always kept the front of the house well swept, cleared of bush. With all the negligent adults who had come and gone, Gladys had never seen the place look so good. How balanced life's ironies could be. From the day she and Ezra had met, he had been the one needing help. And now this boy whose hand she had held in the operating room was trying to rescue her as she had rescued him. If she had ever doubted her instinct toward kindness, Ezra had erased that doubt. The Zams and Roberts and Byrons of the world were the mere weeds in the land her goodwill had watered. Ezra was the tree.
So beautiful.
Thanks.
Yeah, it's really well done. We'll get to questions from the audience in just a minute, but first let's return to that question of what answers were you looking for in yourself and in your own life by feeling so compelled to follow Gladys?
Yeah, well, I think there was definitely that the desire to find out what made Gladys tick, partially sprouted out of that feeling that we all have, feeling, especially now, overwhelmed with the number and complexity of problems that we face, and this feeling of impotence, or this feeling of, why bother? Like, how can we actually move the needle? How can we stop this disaster from happening? And there's disasters every day. So I think in Western or in wealthier countries, I think we tend to feel like we want to solve problems, and if we can't, then we feel powerless. And I think with Gladys, there was some real sustenance in recovering this idea of the value of the small but consistent act. This idea of addressing things in any way you can and just being persistent about it. There was that. And then also it's that idea of engagement, the face-to-face contact, and I think that's the part that we miss sometimes,
Right.
We can volunteer or we can donate money, but there's something about seeing, facing the problem on the ground, I think that is nourishing for both sides. And I think that's something that I really saw that Gladys gets from what she does. And it's not so easy to put in practice, I think, all the time, but I don't think after following her for that time, I thought, well, there's kind of no excuse. So I think that was something that I really took from being with her.
And so how does that play out in your life? Has something changed in your life to following with Gladys?
Well, I think, now I've been involved with Gladys's World, and now actually it is more like, we have a fundraiser for her, and
Oh,
I've
you
just
do?
been,
Great.
involved in just trying to help anyway. I mean, when I was writing the book, I couldn't be involved, and it was
Yes.
very frustrating sometimes.
Because you could give $10 and make a big difference.
Exactly.
Right, and you weren't able to.
So like the moment I knew I was done with research, I was just like, let me
So
help.
what? Tell us about that. What are you doing in terms of the fundraiser and all that?
So there is a fundraiser for projects at the garden. So some people have donated. I've been the liaison for donations that have really helped the garden get to this point. And but I wasn't soliciting it. It just sort of things came up. But now we have a fundraiser through youcaring.com, and we have these bookmarks that have.
And we've got bookmarks.
We've got bookmarks, yeah. But
Ava's
what
got
I love
bookmarks.
about Gladys is that she's so specific. I said, Gladys, we'd like to try to help fundraise, and so, let me know, like, what's the amounts that you're thinking of. She sends me, it took her forever to respond, and I thought, I wonder what's going on. She sends me this list, and it's everything from, she wanted to start a mushroom project, so it's like this much for the soil and this much for the, like down to the nails of,
Yes.
So I just love that idea of like, she's not taking anything for granted or thinking, oh, I need about this much. It's like, this is exactly where this will go to. So,
Right.
there's like goats, mushrooms, and some irrigation, a deeper well, those kind of things.
And how's the farm doing?
It's actually doing quite well. And again, I think here she's really, and I think Ezra's led the way on this, that instead of before it was just like, oh, let's do a little bit at a time, let's grow these crops, and now it's like, let's get this place the size that we want. Let's invest in that infrastructure. So that's really what they're doing. But
It's phenomenal because some of the kids, like Douglas, is a really bright kid and a good student, and she helped him as a bright kid. Ezra sounded like he did okay in school. He wasn't that interested in school, and sounds like now he's really found a place for his life.
That's great, you know. And then the other thing I should mention about the gardens is it's not just this sort of like money-making venture. You know, I was talking about how the kids, when they have these school breaks, it will be up to like 2 months.
Right.
So the kids, so far it's just the boys. Like she doesn't quite have the facility to have a separate place for the girls to stay. But the boys will come, they'll stay there, they'll help out in the gardens, and they love it because they, you know, like one of the boys said, you know, if you're hungry, you just go and get something. Like you just,
Yeah,
like,
you
and
pick
food
something.
is such a big issue. Then the second thing is they really feel like it's their place. And Ezra has taken to having kind of like these nightly gatherings where they get together and they talk about their goals and they talk about, like they really are fostering a little community there. So I would say, you know, 4 or 5 of the boys who are described in the book now, that's where they want to go. A lot of them, they don't necessarily want to go to their villages to stay with relatives over the holidays. I mean, they'll always have that tie, but they feel like they're doing something and they're part of something when they're at the gardens.
And right before we go to questions, I just want to get around to that quote that I love
Oh,
from
yeah.
her. What's that quote?
Well, you want to read it? Yeah. So, yeah.
That quote is Gladys. So when they're driving in the mud,
Yes.
and she keeps saying to the driver, they're driving in the mud and they're stuck. They can't the car's getting stuck. And she's saying, the road, take that road right there. And he's screaming, there is no road. There's no road. We're in a field of mud. And she says, when you need a road, you make a road. So I feel like that's the whole story of Gladys.
there you
right?
go.
She's making a road.
That might have been a good title. Make a road.
Make a road. Do you guys have any questions?
If anyone has questions, I'll bring the microphone to you.
Jessica, in general, how long were the kids abandoned, or was it years or weeks, or that Gladys would take the cases to try to find and reunite them with their families?
Yeah, so some kids, you know, there's this kid Douglas who walked 60 miles to get to Kampala. He was really lucky because he ended up at a police station and Gladys was there that day. And a lot of times with kids, especially in the city, if they end up wandering in the streets, they get lost and then they might never, it's really hard to locate a child once they're out and not connected to some sort of institution. So there's kids like that, and then there are kids who were in bad situations for a while. It really varies a lot. But in terms of how, you know, the kids that she is taking care of, there's some kids that, like Ezra, she's known for years and years now, and then there's some kids who've been with her for, you know, 2 or 3 years. So her column has let's see, it's about 10 years now, I guess. So if you think of how many kids over the years, but she remembers all of them. When I was there last time, there was a girl who had been hit by a truck, and she's orphaned now, but she had to have a leg amputated, and this was one of the first kids that Gladys wrote about, and so she got her an artificial leg. Well, on this last trip I had with her, she went to visit that girl, and the girl, you know, she's grown, and this leg doesn't fit anymore, and Gladys immediately was like, she couldn't sleep, she had to get, you know, figure this out, and she did. So again, it's not like she's like, oh, fix that
like
one and moved on. You know, she really, like, they're all in there somewhere.
Forgive me, I have 22 questions. How old is Gladys?
Gladys is in her mid-50s.
Mid-50s,
So,
and she's been doing this for 10 years?
Yeah, she's been a journalist for longer than that, and I'm probably getting the year wrong. Or maybe it's, her column has been, maybe it's 11.
And that's where her income comes from, yes?
From writing the
Right.
column. She's a freelancer, so it's quite a tough,
So the paper where she writes this column, she's not on staff?
she's not on staff.
Wow,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Did Rose go to see her father, do you think, because she needed closure? What was her intention with that visit?
I think she is, again, you know, she's this sweet little girl who I think her thinking is a little bit fanciful. So I do think that she, maybe there's a part of her that sort of imagined that it would be different when she saw her father. And I do think it's so hard to know in a kid's mind, but maybe there was also some compartmentalized thing of the trauma that happened, she put somewhere else.
How did he relate to her?
Oh, well, he was very, he was quite emotional when he saw her, and then he denied completely what he had done. And then he was saying, and then when Gladys was saying, we really want to find a relative, and he was saying, well, I need to get out of here first. And so Gladys was like, okay. And then eventually, though, I think she got him to realize that, and he was quite sick. I mean, I think it's pretty clear that he has AIDS, and so I think that was something too where Gladys
Wanting to find out.
yeah.
Because also what you wrote in there was that Rose was seeing all the other kids going to meet their parents.
Yeah.
And they were going on a trip, and they went to the beach, and and so I think that part of it was that she wanted to be like the other kids. It's kind of the point you were making.
That's right. And like one of the other girls, when she went to visit her family on the way back, she got chicken for dinner, and she brought some back, and kids shared it, and Rose said, but I didn't get any of it. It was all gone. So she wanted to have the special meal too. So I think there was something of that probably wasn't even really related to seeing her father. Yeah.
Is there a foster care system at all in Uganda?
It's
I think-
called Gladys
right. There is, there's a lot of informal care that happens there, and there's a lot of really wonderful, like-minded people that Gladys also knows. It's just there's also overwhelming need, so the balance is hard. And then but in terms of official facilities and institutions like Trevor, the kid who is eventually diagnosed with autism, it's just there's just not the bandwidth there to take care of.
There's a little bit of adoption that happens, so you wrote a little bit about that.
Yeah, that's a whole other subject. Yeah. Sure, thank you.
Time for a couple more questions.
I have two questions. Actually, one has to do with, is there any way of starting a nonprofit on her behalf where if she uses her journalism skills to talk about what's happening on an internet site where people can come and donate onto that site?
Yeah, I know Gladys at a certain point had tried to create a website, and but I don't think she knew
Too
exactly how to manage it, and setting up anything that has to do with money in Uganda is just really tough. I mean, what I have to do
Yeah,
is
that's what I see.
I have to gather the donations
Right,
and then
right.
wire transfer directly to her bank account, because we've had frauds on the Western Union side. It's been awful.
Oh,
So now we
interesting.
figured it
Okay.
out, but it's her. There have been hacked emails. There have been money
see.
stolen right from the Western Union counter.
Got it.
It's awful. Yeah.
And have you thought about making a film based on her life, or?
Yeah, I think at this point, I don't know. I thought. Do you remember the #1 ladies detective agency books? You guys know. I mean, I loved the sort of episodic nature of that, and you really could do that in real life with Gladys. But again, it'd be filming there. But I do like the idea of. I just see there's so many different narratives, and there's always a twist. I remember at one point the driver was like, each of these stories has a twist. Like, what is this? And so that was. I think it could be definitely.
It could be a
done.
series.
Right, yeah.
A final question?
You touched a little bit on the government agencies. Does Gladys work directly with them, or did you get a chance to see how they operate? Because if they don't have funding, kind of what else do they offer to the citizens of Uganda?
Yeah, so there are some facilities there, but they tend to be quite crowded, and so there's also the problem of, and I think this is not, it's not just in government agencies, it's not just in private organizations, but there is a lot of corruption as well. So it's hard. Gladys has to navigate working in all types of situations. I mean, there's a lot of compromise that has to happen for her to be able just to function in all the places that she goes. So I don't know, the government question is hard. And there's some really good NGOs there, but again, I think it's just the sheer numbers. A lot of times, there are places that she's taken kids, and they just can't take any more. And so that's where I think her dream. I think she'd love to have her own children's home in the garden, basically, or somewhere adjacent. That wouldn't be huge, but just a place where she can take her kids safely, where she doesn't have to knock on doors and not keep them indefinitely, but just some place where she knows that she has space for them. But yeah, so.
Any other questions? We done?
Well, with that, thank you,
All right.
Julie, and thank you, Jessica.
Thank you.
Thank you so